The train's whistle cut through the Wyoming winter like a knife through silence. Rebecca Anderson pressed her face against the frosted window, watching the small station emerge from the endless white landscape. Her heart hammered against her ribs as the locomotive groaned to a halt, steam hissing into the bitter air. This was it. After 3 months of letters, after selling everything she owned, after leaving behind the suffocating confines of her old life, this tiny station would be where her new story began. Where Thomas Mitchell, widower and rancher, would be waiting for his mail-order bride. Rebecca gathered her worn carpetbag and stepped down onto the platform, her boots sinking into the slush. The cold hit her like a physical blow, but she barely noticed. Her eyes swept the scattered figures bundled in coats and scarves, searching for a face that matched the photograph tucked in her coat pocket. A tall man with dark hair, kind eyes, a gentle smile. That's what the photograph had shown. But as the other passengers were claimed by waiting families, as embraces were shared and laughter echoed across the platform, Rebecca remained standing alone. Her breath formed white clouds in the frigid air as she clutched the letter that had changed her life. Honest man seeks kind woman to share quiet life and help raise. Daughter, she whispered to herself, the words she'd memorized weeks ago. The letter had been signed with careful handwriting. Thomas Mitchell, Pine Ridge Ranch. The station master, a grizzled man with tobacco-stained whiskers, approached her as the platform began to empty. You waiting for someone, miss? Yes, sir. Thomas Mitchell from Pine Ridge Ranch. He's supposed to collect me. The old man scratched his beard thoughtfully. Mitchell, you say? Don't recall seeing him today. But storm's been fierce. Could be roads are washed out. Rebecca nodded, forcing a smile. I'll wait. The first day stretched like eternity. Rebecca sat on the hard wooden bench, watching every figure that approached the station, her heart leaping then sinking with each disappointment. The station master offered her coffee from his pot, but she politely declined. She couldn't afford to seem desperate, even though hunger gnawed at her empty stomach. As evening fell and the temperature dropped, the station master's wife, a plump woman named Martha, emerged from their quarters above the depot. You can't sit out here all night, dear. Come inside where it's warm. But Rebecca shook her head. He might come. I need to be here when he arrives. That night, she huddled in the waiting area, her coat wrapped tight around her shivering frame. Through the windows, snow began to fall in heavy flakes, and doubt crept into her mind like the cold seeping through the walls. The second day brought no relief. A few travelers passed through, but none were Thomas Mitchell. The station master's questions became more pointed, more concerned. You sure you got the right station, miss? Maybe there's been some confusion. Rebecca showed him the letter again, pointing to the address written in neat script. Pine Ridge Ranch, Clearwater Station. This is Clearwater, isn't it? Yes, ma'am. But like I said, Mitchell ain't been through here. By the third day, Rebecca's small reserve of dignity began to crack. Her stomach ached with hunger. Her dress was wrinkled from sleeping upright. And worst of all, the whispers had started. She caught fragments of conversation as people passed. Poor thing. Been here 3 days now, ... Heard she's one of them mail-order brides, ... Probably. Got herself abandoned, ... Double quotes. Each word cut deeper than the Wyoming wind. Rebecca had escaped one form of shame only to find herself drowning in another. Back in Philadelphia, she'd been the girl whose father drank away the family store, whose mother died of shame as much as consumption. She'd worked herself to the bone in factories and wealthy homes, saving every penny for this chance at respectability. Now, she wondered if she'd simply traded one humiliation for another. The afternoon of the third day brought a change. Through the swirling snow, Rebecca spotted 2 figures approaching the station, a tall man in a heavy coat and a small child bundled in red wool. Her heart lurched. Could this finally be Thomas Mitchell? But as they drew closer, she could see the man's face clearly for the first time. It wasn't the gentle features from the photograph. This man was younger, with sharp cheekbones and eyes the color of storm clouds. And the way he looked around the platform suggested he wasn't looking for anyone in particular. The child, however, seemed to have a different agenda entirely. The little girl broke free from the man's grip and ran directly toward Rebecca, her small boots splashing through the slush. She couldn't have been more than 6 years old, with auburn braids peeking out from her woolen cap and bright green eyes that sparkled with excitement. "That's her," the child exclaimed, pointing directly at Rebecca. "That's the lady I told you about, Papa. Can she be my mama now?" The man stopped short, his face flushing with embarrassment. "Anna, what are you?" He looked at Rebecca with apologetic eyes. "I'm sorry, ma'am. My daughter sometimes gets carried away with her imagination." But Rebecca was staring at the child in stunned recognition. Those green eyes, that determined little chin, she looked exactly like the photograph of the daughter Thomas Mitchell had sent along with his own picture. "Wait," Rebecca said slowly, her voice barely audible above the wind. Is your name Thomas Mitchell?" The man's expression shifted to confusion. "No, ma'am. I'm Daniel Thompson. This is my daughter Emma." He paused, studying Rebecca's face. "Are you perhaps waiting for someone?" Rebecca felt the world tilt beneath her feet. If this wasn't Thomas Mitchell, then where was he? And why did this little girl seem to know exactly who she was? "I've been waiting for 3 days," Rebecca whispered, the admission scraping her throat raw. "For Thomas Mitchell from Pine Ridge Ranch. He was supposed to collect his double coat." She swallowed hard. "His mail-order bride." Daniel Thompson's face went pale. He looked down at his daughter, who was gazing up at Rebecca with undisguised adoration, then back at the desperate woman on the bench. "Emma," he said carefully, "what exactly did you tell Mrs. Henderson when you asked her to write that letter for you?" The little girl's excitement dimmed slightly, but her chin remained lifted in defiance. "I told her to write to a lady who needed a family. I said we had room for a mama and that Papa was lonely even though he pretends he's not." Rebecca's carefully constructed world crumbled around her. The letter, the photograph, the promise of a new life. All of it had been the desperate wish of a motherless child who simply wanted someone to care for. Her dad, as the truth settled over the platform like the falling snow. Rebecca realized her nightmare was just beginning. She had no money for a return ticket, no home to go back to, and now no future to move toward. But as she looked into Emma's hopeful face and saw Daniel Thompson's growing horror at what his daughter had done, Rebecca felt something unexpected stir in her chest. Perhaps this wasn't the end of her story after all. Perhaps it was just the beginning of a different one entirely. The silence stretched between them like a frozen pond, fragile and dangerous. Rebecca stared at little Emma, whose bright green eyes had begun to fill with tears as she sensed the adult's distress. Daniel Thompson ran a hand through his dark hair, his jaw working as he processed what his daughter had done. "Emma," he said softly, kneeling down to her level. "Do you understand what you've done?" The little girl's lower lip trembled. "I just wanted a mama like the other children have," Mrs. Henderson said. "If I wrote a letter and sent Papa's photograph, maybe a nice lady would come and love us." Rebecca's heart clenched. She recognized the desperate longing she'd felt it herself as a child, when her mother grew sick and her father turned to drink. But this time, she was the one paying the price for a child's innocent wish. "Mrs. Henderson?" Daniel asked sharply. "The school teacher?" Emma nodded miserably. "She helped me write it real pretty. She said sometimes prayers come in envelopes." Daniel closed his eyes, and Rebecca could see him fighting between anger and heartbreak. When he opened them again, he looked directly at her. "Miss ... he began. "Anderson. Rebecca Anderson. Miss Anderson, I cannot begin to apologize for what has happened here. My daughter has," his voice caught. "She's put you in an impossible situation through no fault of your own." Rebecca stood slowly, her legs stiff from 3 days of waiting. "The photograph," she said numbly. "In the letter." "That was you?" Daniel's face flushed. "Emma must have taken it from my dresser. It was made last spring when the traveling photographer came through town." The pieces clicked into place with devastating clarity. A lonely little girl, missing her mother. A photograph of a handsome father. A schoolteacher with a romantic heart who didn't understand the consequences of helping a child's fantasy become someone else's reality. "What happened to your wife?" Rebecca asked quietly. "Fever took her 2 years ago," Daniel replied, his voice rough. "Emma was only 4. She barely remembers her mother, but she sees other families in town and knows something's missing." Emma tugged on Rebecca's warm coat sleeve. "Are you mad at me?" she whispered. Rebecca looked down at the child who had unknowingly destroyed her last hope for respectability and found she couldn't summon anger. Instead, she felt a familiar ache, the same one she'd carried since her own mother's death. "No, sweetheart," Rebecca said gently. "You were just hoping for something every child deserves." Daniel stood, his expression tormented. "Miss Anderson, I have to ask, do you have somewhere to go? Family, perhaps?" The question Rebecca had been dreading. She lifted her chin, trying to salvage some dignity. "I'll manage." "That's not an answer." Rebecca's composure cracked. "No," she admitted. "I sold everything I owned for the train ticket. I have 18 cents and the clothes on my back." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I'd burn my bridges, thinking I was moving towards something better." Daniel was quiet for a long moment, snow collecting on his broad shoulders. Finally he spoke. "I have a proposal." Rebecca's heart jumped, then immediately fell as he continued. "Not that kind of proposal," he said quickly. "But you need shelter, and Emma clearly needs ... He looked at his daughter, who was watching them both with desperate hope. "Perhaps you could stay with us temporarily. Help with Emma, earn some money to get back on your feet." "Like a governess?" Rebecca asked. "Like a ... Daniel struggled for the word. "Like someone who cares." Emma's been through 3 housekeepers since her mother died. They all left because she's too much trouble, too demanding, too heartbroken. But she took to you immediately." Rebecca felt a spark of something she thought was dead possibility. But pride warred with desperation in her chest. "I won't be your charity case, Mr. Thompson. You wouldn't be. Emma needs someone who understands what it's like to lose a mother." And I ... double quotes. His voice grew quiet. "I could use help figuring out how to be both parents to a daughter who's growing up too fast." Emma stepped closer to Rebecca, slipping her small mittened hand into Rebecca's cold fingers. "Please stay," she whispered. "I promise I'll be good." Rebecca looked down at the child, at the hope shining in her eyes, at the loneliness that mirrored her own. Then she looked at Daniel Thompson, seeing past his initial embarrassment to something deeper. This was a man struggling to hold his small family together, just as she had struggled to survive after her world fell apart. 3 months, Rebecca said finally. "I'll stay 3 months to help Emma and save money for a fresh start somewhere else." Daniel nodded. 3 months. But as they gathered Rebecca's meager belongings and began the journey to the Thompson Ranch, none of them suspected that 3 months would be nowhere near enough time for what was about to unfold. Emma chattered excitedly in the wagon, pointing out landmarks and telling Rebecca stories about their neighbors. But Rebecca noticed the shadows that crossed Daniel's face when Emma mentioned her mother, and the careful way he watched Rebecca, as if trying to figure out what kind of woman finds herself stranded at a train station with nothing but hope and heartbreak. What Rebecca didn't know was that Daniel Thompson had his own secrets. That the schoolteacher Mrs. Henderson had been trying to play matchmaker for months, dropping hints about suitable women in town. that Emma's letter hadn't been entirely her own idea, and most importantly, that Thomas Mitchell, the real Thomas Mitchell, was indeed expecting a bride. But he lived 3 towns over, and his letter had never reached Rebecca at all. The truth was still unraveling, and the consequences were far from over. The Thompson Ranch spread across a valley like something from Rebecca's dreams of the West. A sturdy log house with smoke curling from the chimney, a red barn, and horses grazing in snow-dusted fields. It should have felt like sanctuary. Instead, as Daniel helped her down from the wagon, Rebecca felt like an imposter stepping onto someone else's life. "It's beautiful," she said softly, and meant it. "Mama used to grow flowers along the porch," Emma said, skipping ahead. "But they all died after she went to heaven. Papa says flowers are too much trouble." Daniel's jaw tightened, but he said nothing as he carried Rebecca's carpet bag toward the house. Inside, the warmth hit Rebecca like an embrace, but she quickly noticed the signs of a household without a woman's touch. Clean but sparse, practical but cold. Emma's drawings were pinned to one wall in cheerful chaos, but the rest of the house felt like it was holding its breath. "Emma's room is upstairs," Daniel said, setting down Rebecca's bag. "There's a small room next to it where you can sleep." It was meant to be a sewing room, but But Mama never got to use it, Emma finished matter-of-factly. She was always too tired before she went to heaven. The casual way Emma spoke of her mother's death made Rebecca's heart ache. She recognized the tone, the careful detachment children used to protect themselves from grief too big for their small bodies. "I'll show you." Emma grabbed Rebecca's hand and pulled her toward the stairs, chattering about which steps creaked and where the good hiding spots were. The sewing room was tiny but clean, with a narrow bed and a window overlooking the barn. Someone had placed fresh linens on the bed and a small vase of pine boughs on the windowsill. Daniel's work, Rebecca realized, and felt an unexpected flutter of gratitude. "Emma, let Miss Anderson get settled," Daniel called from downstairs. But Emma had already made herself comfortable on the bed, clearly planning to supervise Rebecca's unpacking. "You don't have very many things," she observed as Rebecca opened her carpet bag. "No," Rebecca agreed. "But sometimes having less means you can move more easily toward new adventures." Emma's eyes lit up. "Is that what this is? An adventure?" Before Rebecca could answer, Daniel appeared in the doorway. "Emma, come help me with the evening chores. Miss Anderson needs to rest, but I want to stay with her." "Emma." Daniel's voice carried gentle authority, and Rebecca noticed how the little girl immediately obeyed, though not without a dramatic sigh. After they left, Rebecca sat on the bed and allowed herself one moment of overwhelming fear. What was she doing here? She wasn't a governess or a housekeeper. She was a factory girl from Philadelphia who believed in fairy tales and mail-ordered dreams. But as she unpacked her few belongings, her mother's Bible, 2 spare dresses, a photograph of her parents on their wedding day, Rebecca felt something settle in her chest. Maybe this wasn't the life she'd planned, but it was better than the cold platform where she'd spent 3 days learning what abandonment felt like. That evening, Rebecca helped Emma with her letters, while Daniel worked on ranch accounts at the kitchen table. The domestic scene felt strange and wonderful, like trying on clothes that didn't quite fit but might with time. "Can you read stories?" Emma asked, leaning against Rebecca's shoulder. "I can. Would you like me to read to you before bed?" Emma's face lit up like Christmas morning. "Papa tries, but he makes all the voices sound the same." From across the room, Daniel looked up with a rueful smile. Guilty as charged. Later, after Rebecca had read 3 stories and tucked Emma into bed, she found Daniel standing on the front porch, staring out at the snow-covered fields. "She seems happier already," he said without turning around. Rebecca joined him in the cold air, wrapping her shawl tighter. "Children are resilient. Sometimes they just need to know someone sees them. Is that what you needed?" Someone to see you? The question was too perceptive, too close to truths Rebecca wasn't ready to share. We all need that, don't we? Daniel turned to study her face in the moonlight. What really happened to you back east? What made you desperate enough to travel across the country to marry a stranger? Rebecca was quiet for so long that Daniel began to think she wouldn't answer. Finally, she spoke. My father was a good man before the drink took him. After my mother died, he couldn't find his way back to who he'd been. The debts piled up. The house, the shop, everything was lost. I worked in factories and wealthy homes, anywhere that would pay me enough to keep us afloat. But it was never enough. She paused, her breath forming white clouds in the frigid air. The night I left, he was passed out on the kitchen floor, and there were men at the door demanding payment. They offered me another way to settle the debt. Rebecca's voice grew hard. I took every cent I'd saved and bought a train ticket instead. Daniel was quiet, processing her words. You saved yourself. I ran away, Rebecca corrected. There's a difference. No, Daniel said firmly. There isn't. Not when staying means losing everything that matters. Something in his tone made Rebecca look at him more closely. What did you run from? Daniel's laugh was bitter. This ranch. This life. I was supposed to be a lawyer back east, following in my father's footsteps. But I met Emma's mother at a church social, and she dreamed of the frontier. We came here full of romantic notions about building something new. And then? Then she died, and I realized I'd traded everything I knew for a dream that died with her. Daniel's hands gripped the porch railing. Some days I wonder if I'm raising Emma out here because it's what her mother wanted, or because I'm too proud to admit we made a mistake. Rebecca understood the weight of that admission. They were both refugees from different kinds of failure, different kinds of loss. Emma doesn't think it's a mistake, Rebecca said softly. This is her home. Her whole world. I know. Which is why I can never leave. Even when the loneliness gets so heavy I can barely breathe. The honesty in his voice made Rebecca's chest tight. She'd expected to be the only broken one in this arrangement, but Daniel Thompson was carrying wounds as deep as her own. 3 months, she said quietly, reminding them both of their agreement. 3 months, Daniel agreed. But as they stood together in the cold Wyoming night, both of them knew that some things couldn't be measured in time. Some things change you whether you plan for them or not, and neither of them noticed Emma watching from her bedroom window, her small face pressed against the glass, listening to every word and making plans of her own. 2 weeks into her stay at the Thompson Ranch, Rebecca had fallen into a rhythm that felt dangerously like belonging. She woke before dawn to start breakfast, helped Emma with her lessons, mended clothes, and tried not to notice how Daniel's eyes followed her movements around the house with growing warmth. But routines, Rebecca learned, could shatter as quickly as thin ice dot. She was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when she heard the horse approaching at full gallop. Daniel had ridden into town for supplies, leaving Rebecca alone with Emma, who was supposed to be practicing her arithmetic inside. The rider who appeared around the bend was a stranger, a well-dressed man on a fine horse, both looking travel-worn and determined. Rebecca's stomach clenched with instinctive unease as he dismounted near the porch. You there, girl, he called out, clearly mistaking her for hired help. This the Thompson place? Yes, sir, Rebecca replied carefully, staying near the clothesline where she could grab Emma and run, if necessary. The man consulted a piece of paper from his coat pocket. Name's Howard Brennan. I'm looking for a woman named Rebecca Anderson. Been tracking her from Philadelphia on behalf of her father's creditors. Rebecca's blood turned to ice water. The laundry basket slipped from her hands, scattering Daniel's shirts across the snow. Don't know anyone by that name, she managed, but her voice betrayed her. Brennan smiled, cold and knowing. Funny thing about running, Miss Anderson. It only works if no one's motivated enough to follow. Your father's debts have been sold to some very persistent gentlemen. They want their money, or they want you. My father's debts aren't mine, Rebecca said, lifting her chin despite the terror clawing at her throat. Maybe not legally, but morally? Brennan shrugged. They figure a dutiful daughter might feel differently when her father's. Life hangs in the balance. Emma appeared in the doorway, drawn by the sound of voices. Miss Rebecca? Who's that man? Go inside, Emma, Rebecca said firmly, not taking her eyes off Brennan. Now, but Emma, with a child's instinct for trouble, stayed frozen in the doorway. Brennan noticed her and smiled an expression that made Rebecca's skin crawl. Pretty little thing. Be a shame if something happened to disrupt this cozy arrangement you've got here. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Rebecca stepped closer to the house, positioning herself between Brennan and Emma. What do you want? $500. Or you come back with me to Philadelphia and work off the debt the way they see fit. Rebecca's heart hammered against her ribs. $500 might as well have been $5,000. She had maybe $20 saved from the small wages. Daniel paid her. I don't have that kind of money. Then you better find it. Or find someone who does. Brennan's gaze swept over the ranch appreciatively. Nice spread here. Prosperous looking. Bet your employer wouldn't want anything unpleasant happening to his property. Or his daughter. The casual cruelty in his voice made Rebecca's vision blur with rage and fear. This was what she'd run from men who saw her as property to be traded, used, discarded. You have 1 week, Brennan continued, swinging back onto his horse. I'll be staying at the hotel in town, making inquiries about the good citizens who live out this way. Be a shame if word got around about the kind of woman Mr. Thompson is living in his house with his innocent daughter. He rode away at a leisurely pace, leaving Rebecca standing in the snow, shaking with fury and terror. Miss Rebecca? Emma ventured, stepping closer. Are you all right? Rebecca forced herself to breathe, to think. She knelt down and pulled Emma into a fierce hug. Everything's fine, sweetheart. Just a man looking for directions. But Emma was 6, not stupid. He scared you. I could tell. Rebecca pulled back to look into Emma's bright eyes. Sometimes grown-ups have problems that children don't need to worry about. But I promise you, nothing bad is going to happen to you or your papa. It was a promise she had no idea how to keep. That evening, when Daniel returned from town, Rebecca struggled to act normal. She served dinner, helped Emma with her evening prayers, read bedtime stories with a voice that only shook slightly. But after Emma was asleep, Daniel found Rebecca sitting at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the flickering candle. Rebecca? He sat down across from her. What's wrong? She'd practiced a dozen lies during the long afternoon, but looking into Daniel's concerned face, the truth spilled out like water from a broken dam. She told him everything about her father's gambling debts, about the men who'd come to their house, about Howard Brennan's visit and his threats. Daniel listened without interruption, his expression growing darker with every word. $500, he said finally. I know it's impossible. I know I should have told you the truth from the beginning. I'll leave tomorrow before he comes back. Like hell you. Whoa. Rebecca blinked at the quiet fury in Daniel's voice. You think I'd let you face those animals alone? You think I'd let them drag you back to that life? Daniel leaned forward, his eyes blazing. Emma would never forgive me. And neither would I. Daniel, you don't understand. These aren't men who negotiate or show mercy. They'll hurt you, hurt Emma, to get what they want. Then they'll learn what happens when someone threatens my family. The word hung between them, family. Rebecca's heart stuttered. I'm not your family, she whispered. I'm just someone you took in out of kindness. Daniel reached across the table and covered her hands with his. His palms were calloused from ranch work, warm and steady. Rebecca Anderson, You became family the moment you read Emma her first bedtime story. The moment you taught her how to braid her doll's hair. The moment you made this house feel like a home instead of a monument to grief. Tears Rebecca had held back for weeks finally spilled over. I can't let you risk everything for me. Too late, Daniel said softly. I already have. Outside, snow began to fall again, covering the world in dangerous beauty. Inside, two people who'd found each other by accident, prepared to fight for the right to choose their own future. But neither of them knew that Emma was awake upstairs, listening to every word and making a decision that would change everything. Emma Thompson was small for her age, but she wasn't naive. She'd heard every word of the conversation downstairs, pressed against her bedroom floor with her ear to the gap between the floorboards. The bad man wanted to take Miss Rebecca away. Papa was angry and scared, though he was trying to hide it. And $500 was more money than existed in the whole world. But Emma had something the adults didn't know about. The next morning, while Rebecca helped Daniel with the morning chores and both tried to pretend everything was normal, Emma slipped into her father's study. Hidden behind the big leather-bound books her mother used to read, Emma had her own secret collection. For 2 years, she'd been saving everything, every penny she found between sofa cushions, every coin visitors dropped, every cent from her small allowance. Other children spent their money on peppermint sticks and ribbons, but Emma had been saving for something more important. Mama. She'd overheard enough adult conversations to know that important things cost money. New dresses cost money. Train tickets cost money. Even prayers sometimes needed money, according to the collection plate at church. So Emma had saved, dreaming of the day she could buy herself a mother. Now she counted her treasure with desperate concentration. $47.33. More money than she'd ever seen in one place. But not nearly enough to save Miss Rebecca. Emma's 6-year-old mind worked frantically. There had to be another way. There had to be something she could do. That afternoon, while Rebecca was teaching her letters, Emma made her move. Miss Rebecca, what makes people go away? Rebecca looked up from Emma's slate, where they'd been practicing words. What do you mean, sweetheart? Mama went away because she was sick. You came here because you were running from bad men. What makes people stay? The innocent question hit Rebecca like a physical blow. Emma ... Is it love? If someone loves you enough, do they stay? Rebecca set down the chalk with trembling fingers. Sometimes love isn't enough, Emma. Sometimes grown-ups have problems that are bigger than love. Emma nodded solemnly, filing this information away. But if the problems went away, then love could be enough. In a perfect world, yes. That evening, after Rebecca had tucked her into bed, Emma waited until the house was quiet. Then she crept downstairs and slipped out the kitchen door into the cold night. The walk to town was longer than she'd ever imagined, and scarier. Shadows moved between the trees, and the snow crunched under her boots loud enough to wake the dead. But Emma kept walking, clutching her life savings in a small cloth bag, because Miss Rebecca was worth being brave for. The hotel sat in the center of town like a giant yellow tooth, light spilling from its windows onto the snow. Emma had never been inside, but she'd watched important people come and go through its fancy doors. Inside, the lobby smelled like cigar smoke and coffee. The clerk behind the desk looked down at her with surprise and growing alarm. Little girl, what are you doing out alone at this hour? I need to see Mr. Brennan, Emma said, trying to sound like the important people she'd watched. It's about business. The clerk's eyebrows shot up. Business? Child, does your father know where you are? This is between me and Mr. Brennan, Emma said firmly, though her voice wavered slightly. Please. Something in her tone must have convinced him, because after a moment's hesitation, he sent her upstairs to room 12. Howard Brennan opened the door in his shirt sleeves, a glass of whiskey in his hand. His surprise at seeing a small girl quickly turned to calculating interest. Well, aren't you the little angel from the Thompson place? Come to visit Uncle Howard? Emma clutched her bag tighter, fighting the urge to run. I came to make a deal. Brennan's laugh was sharp and unpleasant. A deal? What could a little girl possibly have to offer me? Emma untied her cloth bag with shaking fingers and poured the contents onto the small table by the window. Coins scattered across the wood surface, catching the lamplight. $47.33, she announced. It's all the money I have in the world. Brennan's amusement faltered as he realized the child was serious. What exactly are you proposing, little one? Leave Miss Rebecca alone. Take my money and go away and never come back. Your money? Brennan picked up a silver dollar, examining it. Where did you get all this? I saved it, Emma said proudly. I've been saving for 2 years to buy myself a mama. Miss Rebecca is the best mama I could ever have, and I won't let you take her away. For a moment, Brennan was actually speechless. Then his expression hardened. Listen, little girl. Your $47 is sweet, but the debt I'm collecting is $500. You're not even close. Emma's lower lip began to tremble, but she held her ground. Then what do you want? I'll work for you. I'll clean or cook or anything. Just leave Miss Rebecca alone. The offer hung in the air between them, innocent and heartbreaking. Brennan studied the small girl who'd walked miles in the dark to save the woman she loved. Go home, he said finally, his voice rougher than before. Take your money and go home. But, young lady, I received a very interesting visit from a certain Mr. Brennan this morning, demanding to know what foolish notions I'd put in your head about walking to town alone at night. Emma's eyes went wide. He told on me? Quite the contrary. He seemed unsettled by your visit. He asked me how a child could show more courage than most grown men he'd met. Then he paid his hotel bill and left town on the morning stage. The adults stared at Mrs. Henderson in shock. He's gone? Rebecca whispered. Completely gone. Along with his threats and his claims about debts, Mrs. Henderson's smile was triumphant. It seems a 6-year-old girl with $47 and a fierce heart was more than he could handle. Emma beamed proudly, while Rebecca felt tears spring to her eyes. The child's brave gesture hadn't failed after all. It had shamed a grown man into remembering his own humanity. So you see, Mrs. Henderson concluded, standing to leave, everyone in this room is now free to choose their own future. No debts, no threats, no obligations except to your own hearts. After she left, the three of them sat in the warm kitchen, surrounded by possibilities that suddenly seemed endless. Emma broke the silence with her usual directness. Miss Rebecca, are you going to marry the other man now? Rebecca looked at the letter in her hands, then at Daniel's anxious face, then at Emma's hopeful eyes. I don't know, sweetheart. I need to think. But even as she said it, Rebecca's heart was already whispering the answer. She'd spent her whole life running toward safety, toward security, toward the promise of being wanted. Now she was looking at two people who didn't just want her. They needed her, loved her, had been willing to fight for her. And more importantly, she needed and loved them in return. The question wasn't whether she should stay. The question was whether she had the courage to choose love over safety, family over security, and the beautiful uncertainty of a life built together over the predictable loneliness of a life built apart. 3 days passed in a strange suspension of time. Rebecca carried Thomas Mitchell's letter in her apron pocket, its weight both liberating and heavy. She was free to choose her own path now. No debts, no threats, no desperate circumstances forcing her hand, which somehow made the choice harder, not easier. Daniel gave her space, but watched her with eyes full of questions he was too proud to ask. Emma, with a child's intuitive understanding of crisis, was on her best behavior, as if being perfect might tip the scales in favor of staying. On the third evening, Rebecca found herself standing on the front porch again, staring out at the snow-covered mountains. The letter from Thomas Mitchell was unfolded in her hands, his kind words blurring in the moonlight. "Admiring your other option?" Rebecca turned to find Daniel beside her, his expression carefully neutral. "He sounds like a good man," Rebecca said softly. "He does. Responsible. Established. Probably. Has a house that doesn't leak and a barn that doesn't need constant repairs." Rebecca heard the pain he was trying to hide behind practical observations. Daniel ... "You should go to him," Daniel said abruptly. "You should take Emma and go to Pine Ridge. Meet the man who actually chose you from the beginning." Rebecca stared at him in shock. "Take Emma? She loves you more than she's ever loved anyone except her mother. I've watched her bloom these past weeks, watched her become the happy child I thought I'd lost forever. If you're leaving, she should go with you." The magnitude of what Daniel was offering his daughter, his whole world, his reason for staying in Wyoming left Rebecca speechless. "You would let her go?" she whispered. Daniel's hands gripped the porch railing until his knuckles went white. "I'd let her go if it meant she could have the mother she's always wanted and the secure future she deserves." Thomas Mitchell sounds like he could provide both. Rebecca felt tears stinging her eyes. "And what about what you deserve?" Daniel was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with suppressed emotion. "I had my chance at happiness. Emma's mother and we had 3 good years before the fever took her. Some people get a lifetime of love. Some get 3 years. Some get nothing at all. 3 years is more than many people receive. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have." Rebecca folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into her pocket. "What if I told you that I don't want Thomas Mitchell's security? What if I said I'd rather have leaky roofs and broken barn doors and a man who loves his daughter enough to give her away?" Daniel turned to look at her then, hope and fear warring in his expression. "What if I told you," Rebecca continued, stepping closer, "that I've spent my whole life running towards safety, and I'm tired of running? What if I said I'd rather fight for something imperfect and real than settle for something safe and hollow? Rebecca ... What if I said I don't want to be chosen by default or desperation or even kindness? What if I said I want to be chosen by love, the messy, complicated kind that grows between people who see each other's flaws and decide to stay anyway?" Daniel's control finally cracked. He reached for her hands, pulling her closer. "Then I'd say I've been in love with you since the day you taught Emma how to braid her hair. Since the morning I found you asleep in the chair beside her bed when she was sick. Since the night you read stories in 3 different voices and made my daughter laugh." For the first time since her mother died, Rebecca's heart soared, but she wasn't finished. "And what if I told you that Emma isn't the only one who's been blooming these past weeks? What if I said that for the first time in my life, I feel like I belong somewhere, not because I'm useful or needed, but because I'm loved?" Daniel's answer was to kiss her, soft and desperate and full of promises they were both finally ready to make. They were interrupted by the sound of applause from the doorway. "Finally," Emma declared, bouncing on her toes in her nightgown. "I was wondering when you two would figure it out." Rebecca and Daniel broke apart, laughing and embarrassed. "Emma Thompson, you should be in bed," Rebecca scolded, but her voice was full of affection. "I couldn't sleep until I knew you were staying," Emma said, launching herself into Rebecca's arms. "You are staying, aren't you? Forever and ever?" Rebecca looked over Emma's head to meet Daniel's eyes. "Forever and ever," she promised. The next morning, Rebecca sat at the kitchen table with pen and paper, composing 2 very different letters. The first was to Thomas Mitchell, thanking him for his kindness and explaining that she'd found her place elsewhere. She enclosed his travel money with gratitude and the hope that he would find the right woman for Pine Ridge Ranch. The second letter was harder to write. It was addressed to her father in Philadelphia, care of the boarding house where he'd taken a room after losing their home. "Dear Papa," she wrote, "I have found a new life in Wyoming territory. I am well and happy and safe. I hope you can find your way to sobriety and peace. I forgive you, but I cannot save you. That work belongs to you alone. Your loving daughter, Rebecca." She would never know if he received the letter or what he did with it. But writing it lifted a weight from her shoulders that she'd carried for too long. That afternoon, Mrs. Henderson arrived with another visitor, Reverend Wilson from the town church, a kindly man with white whiskers and twinkling eyes. "I hear congratulations are in order," he said, beaming at Daniel and Rebecca. "Mrs. Henderson tells me there's to be a wedding." Emma clapped her hands. "Can I pick the flowers? Can I wear my Sunday dress? Can we have cake?" "All of that and more," Rebecca promised, pulling the little girl close as they began planning a simple ceremony for the following weekend. Rebecca marveled at how different this felt from her original journey west. She wasn't marrying for security or respectability or escape. She was marrying for love, the complicated, imperfect, daily choice kind of love that would require work and commitment and faith. But as she watched Daniel discussing ceremony details with the Reverend, while Emma chattered about wedding cakes, Rebecca knew she'd finally found what she'd been searching for her whole life. Not safety, not security, not even happiness, exactly. "Go home," Brennan snapped, "before someone realizes you're missing and the whole town comes looking for you." Emma gathered her coins, with shaking hands, tears finally spilling over. Her plan had failed. She was just a little girl with $47, and that wasn't enough to save anyone. The walk home was even longer and colder, made worse by the weight of defeat. Emma slipped back into the house just as Daniel was pulling on his coat, clearly preparing to search for her. "Emma." He swept her into his arms, relief and anger warring in his voice. "Where have you been?" "We've been searching everywhere." Rebecca appeared in her nightgown, face pale with worry. "Oh, Emma, we were so frightened." Emma burst into tears, the whole story pouring out between sobs. About the money she'd saved, about her plan to buy Brennan off, about how $47 wasn't enough to save the person she loved most. Daniel and Rebecca exchanged looks over, Emma's head amazed, heartbroken, and falling deeper in love with this brave little girl who tried to save them all. "Emma," Rebecca whispered, kneeling down to eye level, "you walked all that way in the dark, all alone, to protect me?" Emma nodded miserably. "But it didn't work." He said $47 isn't enough. "Oh, sweetheart." Rebecca pulled her close, tears streaming down her own cheeks. "It's enough. It's more than enough. It's the most valuable thing anyone has ever offered me." But even as she comforted the child, Rebecca's mind was racing. Emma's brave gesture had bought them time, but Brennan would be back. And next time, he might not be satisfied with just money. The real battle was just beginning. The next morning brought unexpected salvation in the form of Mrs. Lydia Henderson, the schoolteacher who had unknowingly started this entire chain of events. She arrived at the Thompson Ranch in her small buggy, just as Rebecca was hanging wash on the line, her usually composed face flushed with excitement and worry. "Miss Anderson," she called out, climbing down from her buggy with uncharacteristic haste. "I must speak with you immediately. And with Daniel, too, if he's available." Rebecca felt her stomach clench. Had word of Brennan's threats already spread through town? But Mrs. Henderson's expression wasn't judgmental. It was determined, almost conspiratorial. "Of course," Rebecca said, wiping her hands on her apron. "Daniel's in the barn. Emma's inside practicing her letters." Mrs. Henderson nodded briskly. "Good. What I have to say concerns all of you, but especially you, my dear." They gathered in the kitchen. Emma perched on Daniel's lap while Mrs. Henderson arranged her skirts and pulled a thick envelope from her reticule. Her usually perfect hair was slightly disheveled, as if she'd ridden hard to reach them. "First," Mrs. Henderson began, "I owe you all a profound apology. Emma's letter, I should have questioned a 6-year-old child more carefully before helping her compose correspondence to a stranger." Daniel's arm tightened around Emma protectively. "Mrs. Henderson, we've discussed this. Emma knows she shouldn't have. Please, let me finish." Mrs. Henderson's voice carried the authority of 20 years in the classroom. "Last evening, a most unpleasant man named Howard Brennan visited me. He was asking questions about you, Miss Anderson, and making implications about your character that I found deeply offensive." Rebecca's face went pale. "What did he say?" "Nothing I'm willing to repeat in mixed company. But his questions revealed something important. He doesn't actually have any legal authority to compel you to return east. The debts he's collecting aren't yours. They're your father's. And according to territorial law, children cannot be held responsible for their parents' gambling debts." The silence that followed was broken only by the crackling of the fire. Daniel was the first to speak. "Are you certain about this?" Mrs. Henderson opened her envelope and withdrew several official-looking documents. "I took the liberty of telegraphing my brother in Denver. He's a lawyer, and he sent these territorial statutes by overnight courier. Miss Anderson, you are not legally obligated to pay your father's debts or return to Philadelphia." Rebecca stared at the papers, hardly daring to believe. "But he said—" "He lied," Mrs. Henderson said firmly. "Men like Brennan count on people not knowing their rights. They use intimidation and fear because they have no actual power." Emma squirmed in her father's lap. "Does this mean the bad man can't take Miss Rebecca away?" "Not legally," Mrs. Henderson replied. "But I'm afraid there's more." She withdrew another paper from her envelope, this one bearing an official seal. "I also discovered why you never received the real Thomas Mitchell's letters. It seems there was a mix-up at the postal office in Philadelphia. Your letters were delivered to Rebecca Anderson with an E, who lives 3 streets from your old address. She's been corresponding with the real Thomas Mitchell for months." Rebecca felt the room spin slightly. "So there really was a Thomas Mitchell expecting a bride?" "Very much so. And he's quite concerned about what happened to the woman he thought he was marrying. My brother also sent this." Mrs. Henderson produced a final letter, addressed in careful masculine handwriting to Miss Rebecca Anderson, care of Clearwater Station, Wyoming Territory. With shaking hands, Rebecca opened the letter and read aloud. "Miss Anderson, I have learned through the postal authorities that my letters may have been misdirected, and I fear you may have traveled to Wyoming expecting to meet me. I am Thomas Mitchell of Pine Ridge Ranch, 3 towns east of Clearwater. If this letter reaches you, please note that the fault is entirely with the Postal Service, not with any failing on your part. I have enclosed train fare to continue your journey to Pine Ridge, or to return east if you prefer. I hope this letter finds you safe and cared for." The envelope indeed contained enough money for train passage, along with a photograph of a kind-faced man with gentle eyes, exactly the man Rebecca had expected to meet at the station. "So you see," Mrs. Henderson continued, "you have choices, Miss Anderson. You can continue to Pine Ridge and meet the man who actually sent for you. You can return east with the knowledge that no one can legally force you into servitude, or ... She glanced meaningfully between Rebecca and Daniel, who were staring at each other with expressions of dawning realization. "Or you can stay here, where it's obvious you've found something neither of you was looking for, but both of you needed." Emma clapped her hands together. "Stay. Please stay, Miss Rebecca." But Rebecca was looking at Daniel, seeing her own uncertainty reflected in his eyes. The past month had felt like falling into something wonderful and impossible, but they'd both been operating under the assumption that it was temporary. "I should go," Rebecca said quietly. "To Pine Ridge. Thomas Mitchell sounds like a good man. And he's expecting someone who wants to be there," Daniel interrupted, his voice rough. "Someone who chose him. And I chose you," Emma declared. "I picked you special." Mrs. Henderson smiled, gathering her papers. "I think I've shared enough revelations for one morning. But before I go, there's one more thing you should know." She turned to Emma with an expression both stern and affectionate. She'd found home. The wedding took place on a crisp Saturday morning in February, 6 weeks after Rebecca had first stepped off the train at Clearwater Station. Snow fell gently outside the small church, but inside, warmth radiated from every corner, filled with neighbors who had come to witness love bloom. In the most unexpected circumstances, Rebecca wore her mother's pearl necklace and a blue dress that Mrs. Henderson had helped her alter from one of Emma's late mother's gowns. It felt right, somehow, wearing something that had belonged to the woman whose place she would never try to fill, but whose memory she would always honor. Emma served as both flower girl and ring bearer, her face glowing with pride as she scattered dried rose petals down the aisle. She'd insisted on carrying both rings herself, declaring that since she'd brought Rebecca and her papa together, she should be the one to make it official. Daniel waited at the altar in his best suit, the one he'd worn to his first wedding 8 years ago. But his expression was entirely different now, not the nervous excitement of young love, but the steady certainty of a man who'd learned the difference between infatuation and devotion. When Rebecca walked down the aisle, she wasn't escorted by a father or given away by anyone. She walked alone because she was choosing to give herself freely, without obligation or desperation, to a man who'd seen her at her most vulnerable and decided to stay. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Wilson began, "we are gathered here today to witness something that began with a child's innocent wish and grew into something far more precious, a family choosing to become complete." As they exchanged vows they'd written themselves, Rebecca spoke words she'd never expected to say. "Daniel, I came to Wyoming looking for safety, but I found something better. I found courage. The courage to choose love over security, hope over fear, and tomorrow over yesterday. I promise to build this life with you one day at a time, through good harvests and bad winters, through laughter and tears, until we're too old to remember how we managed without each other." Daniel's voice was steady despite the emotion shining in his eyes. "Rebecca, you didn't just answer Emma's prayers. You answered mine, ones I was too afraid to pray. You brought light back to a house that had forgotten how to be happy. I promise to protect that light, to nurture it, and to love both you and the woman you're still becoming, for all the days of my life." When Emma was asked if she had anything to add, she stepped forward with 6-year-old solemnity. "I promise to be the best daughter to Miss Rebecca, Mama Rebecca, and to help Papa remember to bring her flowers sometimes, because Mamas like flowers, even when it's winter." There wasn't a dry eye in the church. After the ceremony, the entire congregation gathered at the Thompson Ranch for a reception that spilled through every room of the house. Mrs. Henderson had organized the women of the town to provide food, and the men had contributed fiddle music and dancing that lasted well into the evening. As the sun set and the guests finally departed, Daniel, Rebecca, and Emma found themselves alone in their home for the first time as an official family. Emma had fallen asleep in Rebecca's lap during the last of the dancing, and now Rebecca carried her upstairs to bed. As she tucked the little girl under her quilts, Emma's eyes fluttered open. "Mama Rebecca?" she whispered. Double quotes, "Yes, sweetheart? Thank you for staying. Thank you for picking us back when we picked you." Rebecca's heart overflowed. "Thank you for being brave enough to send that letter. For teaching me that sometimes the best things come from the most unexpected places, even when they start with mistakes." Rebecca smiled, smoothing Emma's hair. "Especially then." Downstairs, Daniel was banking the fire when Rebecca joined him. They stood together in the kitchen, where they'd shared so many conversations, so many revelations, so many quiet moments of falling in love. "Any regrets?" Daniel asked, pulling her into his arms. Rebecca considered the question seriously. 6 months ago, she'd been a desperate woman fleeing an impossible situation, willing to marry a stranger for the promise of security. Now she was the wife of a man she loved deeply, the mother of a remarkable little girl, and a valued member of a community that had embraced her completely. "Just one," she said finally. Daniel's eyebrows rose in concern. "I regret that it took me so long to realize that home isn't a place you find, it's something you build with people who love you enough to fight for you." Daniel's smile was soft and sure. "Well, Mrs. Thompson, we have the rest of our lives to perfect the art of building home together, Mrs. Thompson," Rebecca repeated, testing the sound of her new name. "I like how that sounds. I like how you look in my kitchen, wearing my ring, planning our tomorrow." As they climbed the stairs together to their shared bedroom, Rebecca reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She'd answered an advertisement for a mail order bride and found something infinitely more precious, a love that had grown from friendship, respect, and the daily choice to put each other first. Outside, snow continued to fall on the Wyoming landscape, covering the earth in pristine white. Inside, three hearts that had found each other against all odds settled into the rhythm of family life. The little girl who'd sent a letter asking for a mama was finally asleep upstairs, secure in the knowledge that some prayers are answered in ways more wonderful than we dare to imagine. The man who'd thought love was something that happened only once in a lifetime was learning that hearts have infinite capacity for new beginnings. And the woman who'd stepped off a train with nothing but desperate hope had discovered that sometimes the most beautiful destinations are the ones we never planned to reach. In years to come, Emma would tell her own children about the winter her letter brought them a mother, about the woman who chose love over safety and stayed when staying meant risking everything. She would tell them that the best families aren't always born, sometimes they're chosen, one brave decision at a time. And she would tell them that love letters come in many forms, but the most powerful ones are written not with ink, but with daily acts of devotion, sacrifice, and the unwavering belief that some people are worth fighting for. The Thompson family had learned that home isn't where you come from, it's where you choose to plant your heart and tend it with care. And in their small house on the Wyoming frontier, surrounded by snow and starlight and infinite possibility, three hearts had finally found their way home. The E&D sometimes. The most beautiful love stories begin with the word lost and end with the word found. If this tale of unexpected family, second chances, and love that grows from the soil of sacrifice touched your heart, remember that the best chapters of our own lives often start with the courage to hope when hope seems impossible.